Hello and welcome to your last lesson on memory for a little bit anyway. After this we're going to be doing a research project like I mentioned in the last lesson. So 12A you're going to be starting that on Wednesday and 12C you'll be starting on Friday. And that's going to last about 2 weeks and you will have to submit a report for it, but I'll explain more about that next lesson. And after that we will probably just be doing revision sessions because at some point you will still have to do an assessment. And so what I want you to do, if there's anything that you really struggle with or don't quite understand, I want you to email me or comment on Show My Homework so I can get some revision sessions ready. But I want them to be as beneficial for you as possible. So let me know what you're struggling with. Today we're going to, first of all, create a little revision tool for the whole of eyewitness testimony. So far for eyewitness testimony, we've covered misleading information, post-event discussion and anxiety. And I feel like with revision, the thing that students struggle with the most is remembering the A03, the evaluation part of the topics. So I've created this resource in order for you to be able to have the same A03 for each of the eyewitness testimony topics. So hopefully that'll come in quite handy. Then we're going to be evaluating the cognitive interview. So I'm just going to talk you through the evaluation and make sure we really understand it. And all you're required to do for that is just to take notes as I speak. And then finally, we're going to complete a short exam style question. It's just a 4 marker, so nothing too scary. So this is what I want you to complete. Just a little reminder, A01 is your description of the topic. So tell me about anxiety in its effect of eyewitness testimony. Tell me about the research. There's famous research for each of these 3 topics. So just a little bit, maybe 3 bullet points on each of the A01s. And then for the A03, the evaluation, you can look back in your textbooks, look back in your notes and come up with 3 and try to come up with 3 of the same ones. Okay, so I want you to just pause me now and have a go at that. It should take you about 10 to 15 minutes, especially if you're looking through your textbooks. So hopefully by now you've managed to note some things down. I'm going to go through the answers that I've got, so just jot anything down that you didn't manage to get. For anxiety, for your A01, you want to be discussing Johnson and Scott's study, and they tested the weapon focus effect. So they had 2 separate groups of participants, an independent group's design, and one group, after they'd heard an argument, saw a man emerging with a pen covered in grease, and the other group, after hearing an argument, saw a man emerging with a knife. And then each group was asked to identify this man. So they were shown 50 photos, and Johnson and Scott found that in the knife condition, the high anxiety condition, they were less accurate at recall. So, evaluation. Lack of population validity. The population for Johnson and Scott's study was 24 male and 24 female white psychology students. So they don't represent the whole target population. So there is a severe lack of population validity in this study. There are also ethical issues. So participants thought that the argument was real. It might have caused some unnecessary stress. They weren't protected from harm. And the third evaluation is application to real life. So this was a lab study, so therefore it lacks ecological validity. You're unable to relate it to other settings. A way to combat this was Christiansen and Hubinet's study, and they investigated the real Swedish bank robberies. And it's actually been shown that victims of actual crimes have much higher accuracy of recall than those who witness crimes that they're not actually involved in. A01 for misleading information was, of course, Loftus and Palmer. So she tested 45 American students, and there was 5 groups of 9, and they each heard a different verb. So that the IV was the verb that they heard, and the DV was the estimated speed after they'd watched videos of car crashes. And Loftus and Palmer showed that the verb did in fact affect what speed the participants estimated. So smashed, participants estimated a much higher speed than if they'd heard the verb contacted. So it was investigation into misleading information, and it actually does affect the accuracy of recall. So again, it's the same A03. So lack of population validity, 45 American students, you can't apply that to the general population. Ethical issues, they might have experienced stress from seeing a car crash, and also they were deceived. They weren't told the true aim of the study. And then application to real life. So again, it was a lab study, and in real life setting where you're a witness to a car crash, you're never going to be asked to estimate the speed of a vehicle. So you can't really apply it to real life. And then finally, we've got post-event discussion. So A01 is Gabert et al. And so he investigated 60 students and 60 elderly participants. And the IV was discussion or no discussion. No discussion. So some of them were asked to discuss it in pairs before recalling the events that they'd seen on a video. And if they had discussed it, 71% of them recalled information that they had not seen. So 71% of them remembered information that their partner had actually seen and not them. And again, we can use the same evaluation issues for this study. So lack of population validity, although for this one it is slightly better because they didn't just use students, they also used elderly participants. So you can say that this study actually has a higher population validity, which is a strength. Ethical issues, again, deception. They weren't told that they were watching the same video as the partner. They weren't told the true aim of the study. And again, application to real life. It was a lab study, lacks ecological validity. You can't apply it to other settings. Okay, so back to the cognitive interview then. I just want to recap the A01 quickly, just so it's really fresh in our minds before we start evaluating. So it was done by Geiselman, and he designed it to try and improve the eyewitness testimony, because we've seen that lots and lots of factors affects the accuracy of it. And it focuses on 4 main points. So number 1 was the mental reinstatement of the original context. So witnesses are told, to try and remember everything about that day, what they were wearing, how they felt, what they'd eaten, what they could smell, because as we've seen in previous memory lessons, more cues lead to better recall, and this was shown by Tulving and Thompson with the encoding specificity principle. And then the second point of cognitive interview is to report everything. So as opposed to a standard police interview where they ask closed questions, witnesses are told to report absolutely everything, even if they think it's not relevant and even if they think that the police might already know. Then they're asked to change the order of events. So they don't tell the night or the day from start to finish. They might tell it from the end to the start. And what this does, it gets rid of any existing schemas. So in certain situations, like in a shop, for example, you expect certain things to happen. Like you expect potentially the cashier to say, "Have a nice day." By changing the order, it gets rid of anything that you're expecting. And similarly, if we change the perspective, so tell the account from another witness's perspective, it also avoids schemas because we're not looking at it from our own point of view. This is the sort of question that you could get asked. Discuss the use of cognitive interview as a means of improving the accuracy of eyewitness testimony. So we're going to talk about the A03 part of that in a second. And just a quick reminder, for a 16 marker you need 6 A01 points and 10 A03 points, so 5 peels. And for the A01, for this question, you'd talk about each of the 4 stages of the cognitive interview. You'd also talk about how that improves the accuracy. So you would talk about cue dependent forgetting, or you'd talk about schemas. You could even talk about the encoding specificity principle. Just something about how the cognitive interview improves accuracy for your A01. And for your A03, I'm going to talk you through the 5 paragraphs that you could write. So number 1 is that there's lots of research support. So firstly, that comes from a meta-analysis of 53 studies, And this meta-analysis found a 34% increase in the number of correct information generated in the cognitive interview compared with a standard interview. However, we have to be careful with these sorts of studies because of their samples. So because they're usually done on students, it lacks population validity, and they're also usually done in a lab, so they lack ecological validity, which means that the results of these studies are in general less valid, less accurate. And Mill and Bull compared responses from participants who used one part of the cognitive interview to a control group. So, for example, the participants might have just been told to report everything. They weren't told to remember everything in the context. They weren't told to change the order or the perspective. They were only told to do one part of the cognitive interview. And this was compared to a control group who were simply just told to try again. And it turns out that the results were similar. So potentially the cognitive interview is only effective if it's done using the 4 stages rather than each individual component. Your second evaluation point is this idea of quantity versus quality. And the whole aim of a cognitive interview is to increase the quantity of recall without affecting the quality of it. But effectiveness may have only been increased in terms of quantity and not quality, because Conken found an increase on 81% in correct information, which is great, but he also found 61% increase in incorrect information, false positive. So witnesses remembering things that weren't actually there when compared to a standard interview. So when police are treating information that's been gathered by a cognitive interview, it has to be done with caution, because it doesn't mean that the information gathered is completely 100% accurate. Evaluation point number 3 is that there's a problem with practical application for the cognitive interview. It requires more time than is often available. And it also requires special training, and many forces have not been able to provide more than a few hours training on this. So it may be done not as effectively as initially designed. So cognitive interview hasn't actually been very widespread because of this fact, because a standard interview takes much less time, takes much less training. So therefore cognitive interview can be seen as less useful and less effective. Number 4 is that comparisons are difficult. So in the real world, cognitive interview is not one procedure, but it's a collection of different techniques. So 4 different techniques all merged into one procedure. And different police units use the different techniques. So for example, Thames Valley Police use a version that does not include the change in perspective technique. So therefore it's difficult to establish the overall effectiveness of the technique when using all the components, because a lot of the police don't use all of the components, they just pick 1 or 2. And evaluation point number 5 is a strength of the cognitive interview, because it's been shown to be useful for older witnesses. So this was found by Miller and Fisher, who compared older and younger adults' memory of a film simulated crime. And the cognitive interview produced more information than the standard interview, as has been seen in previous research. However, the strength of the cognitive interview over the standard interview was greater for older than for younger participants, so it benefited the older participants more. Therefore, individual differences do matter when considering the effectiveness of the cognitive interview. Okay, so now we're moving on to the 4-mark exam question. So we've already touched on these points, so hopefully now you know the A01 for the cognitive interview and these 4 techniques used. To test the effectiveness of this technique, Geiselman asked 89 students to watch a video of a crime. 2 days later, half of the participants were interviewed using the standard police interview and half were interviewed using the cognitive interview. So he did a comparison study, and the table on the left shows the results of this. So mean number of items correctly recalled and the mean number of items incorrectly recalled were noted down. And the question I want you to answer is, with reference to the table, Explain what Geiselman et al. Can conclude about the effectiveness of the cognitive interview. It's a 4-mark question, so just pause me now and have a little go, and then we'll go through the answer. So, you could have said words to this effect. Geiselman et al. Found that the cognitive interview led to a significant increase in the number of correctly recalled items in comparison to the standard interview. So it was 41.67 number of items correctly recalled in comparison to 35.58. So it was pretty significant. However, the number of incorrectly recalled items remained the same for both interview types. So what can we conclude from this? This suggests that the cognitive interview is effective at improving the amount of information recalled from eyewitness testimony, but not effective in eliminating errors. So that's your 4-mark question. That's how much information you would have needed for 4 marks. You could also use this as an evaluation point. I don't see why you couldn't. So that's it for today's lesson. As always, please send over your notes so that I know that you're still on track. So if you can, do it on Show My Homework, please, so that it shows that you've submitted instead of emailing me. And if you have any questions, please get in touch, and you'll hear from me later on in the week. So have a lovely day.